Hi, it is July 22nd, 2022. I am Jason Ross, filling in with Harley Schlanger for your daily LaRouche Organization update. Following a short update on recent developments, I want to focus on what the James Webb Space Telescope and the LaRouche Riemann method tell us about the future and about making policy. So first, let's talk about the situation with Ukraine and the attempt to destroy Russia. A couple of days ago, Kiev's Deputy Defense Minister, Vladimir Havrilov, said, according to the Times, that Ukraine intends to use new weapons being delivered to it or potentially on the way to target Russia's Black Sea naval fleet and to retake Crimea. Now, this is entirely impossible and outrageous. It's completely reasonable for Crimea to be a part of Russia, and anybody saying that Crimea will ever become part of Ukraine again is somebody who wants war with Russia, who wants conflict. That's the only reason you would say something like that. As more weapons go to Ukraine or there's discussions about sending more to Ukraine, the response from Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, was pretty direct. He said that changing conditions on the ground will change Russia's territorial goals. At this point, at the very beginning of the operation, Russia's stated goal was the independence of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, the demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine. But if weapons capable of firing 300 kilometers of accurate missiles capable of going that distance are sent into Ukraine, Lavrov is saying the obvious, that the territorial line will have to move further west in order to ensure Russia's security. As far as the idea that Russia is preventing grain exports by threatening or having the potential to attack militarily grain ships leaving from Ukrainian ports, which is silly, there has been a deal brokered and moved forward by the assistance of Turkey. And the reports are that this deal is going to be signed today. As of this recording, I wasn't able to confirm that, but this is an arrangement that Turkey has worked out with Russia and Ukraine. The idea that Russia is an international pariah, that nobody speaks with Russia, that Russia is a total outcast, simply isn't true. Some of the most recent examples of this, besides things like the flows of Russian exports into China or India, is the upcoming travel schedule of Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. In the next couple of weeks, he's going to Egypt, to Ethiopia, to Uganda, to the Republic of Congo, to Uzbekistan, and to Cambodia. And then there is the G20 meeting in Indonesia later this year, which the president of Indonesia has been very firm he intends to invite Russia as a member of the G20. The foreign minister of Hungary has just been in Moscow. So this is the real world where people recognize that you cannot simply isolate Russia from the entire world. Also, as Vladimir Putin pointed out, if you make it impossible for Russia to export fertilizer and food, whether there's direct sanctions on those or simply financial ones that make it impossible to ensure or conduct these transactions, you are starving the world. And the world is being starved. The economy is being destroyed. This is intentional, and it's not only something that those pushing for war with Russia are willing to countenance. This is, in its own way, an independent goal to cause economic destruction, part of the Great Reset. More on that in a moment. I just wanted to say also about China, because this isn't a separate thing. We've seen these high-level provocations towards China. The former Secretary of Defense of the U.S., Esper, going to Taiwan and saying that the one China principle is outdated. It's outlived its usefulness. That we should, as the United States, end strategic ambiguity and just say that we're going to defend Taiwan militarily in the event that the mainland acts militarily for reunification. Dangerous. Nancy Pelosi, who was going to go in April, fortunately, it turned out well on this front that she caught COVID. She's now mooting the idea of going next month. This is something that China would be outraged about. A Speaker of the House of Representatives, the last time one went to China was Newt Gingrich in '97, but at the time, he was, of course, a Republican. Clinton was a Democrat. In this case, the Speaker would represent the same party as the administration. So this is a different kettle of fish, and clearly what it would mean right now is a huge provocation. The head of MI6 in Britain, Richard Moore, said, quote, "We now devote more effort to China than any other single subject." So the goal here from Britain, from Wall Street, London, is to crush Russia and China to maintain a unipolar world, a world that is over. You know, this slogan, "You'll own nothing and be happy," that's attached to the World Economic Forum, an idea where only the very wealthiest would actually own anything, and you're supposed to be happy while the entire world is at risk of nuclear war, and the ability to produce economically to support future generations is destroyed. This is insane. So on the Great Reset, on the Green New Deal, on the goal for you to own nothing, your happiness is another matter, some politicians have taken advantage of the fact of the hot and dangerous conditions currently underway, known as summer, and they want to take measures that would make summer more deadly. Okay, people do die from intense heat. Now, what happens if you shut down energy? If you say that you can't run your air conditioner because the wind isn't blowing, that there's not enough power for you? Is that a good way to combat climate change? That's a good way to ensure that there are more victims of what the climate does, or rather, of what the weather does. Oh, it's getting hot. People will die in the heat. Not if there's air conditioning. Not if more people are able to engage in agriculture from an air-conditioned tractor cab, and you've increasingly brought more capital into that, mechanized it. That is actual progress. Shutting down a reliable energy supply so that people die of heat in the summer or freeze to death in the winter, that's not combating climate change. That's bringing on more victims. And that's exactly what these policies that would supposedly combat it will do. More weather deaths. So the farmer protests in the Netherlands, I'll just mention this again. This is a perfect example of how people who intend to actually produce, food, which we all need to eat, are being hampered or defeated by supposedly climate-related goals of shutting down the use of nitrogen fertilizer, of the EU putting out these arbitrary percentages of 30% less of this, 50% less of that. The goal of these things is to reduce production. We're being asked to walk the plank. There's no other way to put it. And this also takes place in softer ways as well, like the ban on straws or bags, to remind you on every trip to the grocery store that you're a serf and you deserve the inconvenience of having to bring your own bags instead of them just being provided there. I mean, what if you commute? What if you don't use a car? You're supposed to carry around empty bags on the bus and the subway to stop by the store on the way home? I mean, really, anyway. And then just a few things on the U.S. There's obviously immense terror about the potential return of Trump to the White House, and we've seen with these January 6 hearings what is investigated and what is not. The knowledge of federal agencies before, during, planning out those events are clearly not something that's being investigated. Something that would be worth figuring out is whether the lunatic ideas of John Eastman, for example, or about Dominion voting being controlled by China, who fed these things in to Team Trump in 2020, 2021. These zany ideas seemed to almost be designed to discredit the entire effort there. Where did that come from? That would be worth investigating more directly. But look, the powers that be are the powers that were. A new world is coming into being. The power of NATO and so on is really collapsing, except for the fact that there are nuclear weapons. So let me shift and talk about what we see in the future with, for example, the James Webb Space Telescope, which is a phenomenal piece of equipment, and it shows the amazing achievements that can be accomplished when ingenuity is applied to something that's meaningful and profound. This space telescope allows us to look back into the distant past in new wavelengths with incredible precision. This is a piece of equipment, this is an observatory that could only exist in space. And in fact, its location on the far side of the Earth, basically it orbits a gravitational anomaly, not an anomaly, it's predicted, but it essentially orbits a physically determined point, but there's nothing there, where if you took the sun, the Earth, and then kept going a little bit further, there's this spot behind the Earth, so it's in the shade of the Earth, right, where the telescope's able to exist. It has that amazing sun shield to keep it extremely cold. You couldn't have a telescope at these cold temperatures here on Earth. It has to be in space, both to be away from the radio effects of the Earth and the sun, and to be at a temperature where it's able to actually look at the universe instead of seeing its own warmth. So, this phenomenal piece of equipment, what physical theories is it going to overturn? What ideas that are written in textbooks will have to be rewritten? And this is very important because really fundamental science, I believe, has slowed in recent decades. Could this be the sort of thing that provides new anomalies to move it forward again? I think that's part of us. And this ability to discover new things, this is part of what makes us all, this is what makes us all human. And this is a particular source of pride for the US, which, since the assassination of Kennedy nearly 60 years ago, we've seen so much regression in so many physical economic areas, especially compared to what could have been. But we went to the moon. We built Hubble. We built other space telescope platforms. This one took 25 years from conception to first scientific images. And it's wonderful that the team put in the effort and took the time required to make sure it was perfect before launch. But how about putting more priority on projects like this? How about fusion investment? Nuclear fusion can transform everything. People talk about solar panels. I think I said enough about that. But what's the power source of a solar panel? The sun. What's the power source of the sun? Nuclear fusion. Hydrogen's coming together and forming helium, for the most part. Now, why don't we do that ourselves right here? Instead of capturing energy from the sun so far away, how about if we make our own? This has been a major initiative by Lyndon LaRouche, the LaRouche movement, for decades, to recognize the tremendous potential that will come from commercializing and controlling nuclear fusion. This is the kind of thing that deserves ample investment, not windmills, not solar panels. This is the kind of breakthrough that will transform our relationship to materials, to ores, to water. If you can desalinate ocean water much more cheaply than you can at present, it would be something that could be used at an agricultural level and not only in an urban level for homes and businesses, as desalination is used today in the United States. This would change everything. Speaking of changing everything, then, that leads me to the final thing I wanted to bring up, which is the LaRouche-Riemann method. So Lyndon LaRouche talks about the breakthroughs that he made in the late 40s, very early 50s in thinking about economics, and he puts a great focus on the German scientist, mathematician Bernard Riemann. Riemann developed an idea about the shape of space that was then used by Einsteinian relativity. Riemann developed a method of analysis situs, of looking at something in terms of the geometry that underlies its behavior, even if it's not immediately obvious, to look at the topology of complex functions. Now, he showed a way of understanding how new incommensurabilities are distinct topological singularities, that types of change are not localizable. So just to explain that a bit, when you introduce an entirely new technology, a new scientific principle into the economy, how do you measure its value? Okay? When the steam engine was developed, allowing factories where you don't have to rely on blowing wind or running water, you can put one anywhere because you have a steam engine, as long as you can get the coal there. And as far as that aspect of things, railroads, totally transforming the transportation network in the US around the world. And this creates the ability to have totally new productive processes. It changes the potential population density of the human species. And the benefits aren't local. They're not only in transportation or industries that directly use trains or people who use trains to move themselves or industrial output or input from place to place. The entire economy transformed. An economy with steam power is so fundamentally different from an economy without steam power that trying to put into numeric form what that difference is will always be wrong. The fact that you can't directly compare it, that's the most important thing about that change. And that's something that LaRouche addressed with this LaRouche-Riemann method, and which Brand X economics simply does not. Now, let me draw an analogy to biological evolution on this. The development of endothermy, of being warm-blooded animals like us, where unlike a lizard or a snake, we can regulate our own body temperature. So just like the James Webb Space Telescope needs a special temperature, extremely cold, to operate, we also need a special temperature to operate. Not in the environment outside of us, but in the one that we create. We have an infrastructure in our bodies to create a reliable temperature for new processes like thought, like our big brains, right? Mammals, warm-blooded mammals, are able to have an infrastructure platform to use new biological technologies. That's growth. That's the kind of thing we do when we build a new infrastructure platform, like a fusion-powered platform, like we did when we electrified the nation. I mean, literally, with electricity and electrical lines. That's growth. You can't measure it in money. Making money in stocks is not growth. Making money by buying up large blocks of houses to take them out of circulation and generate rental income, that's not growth. Printing money is definitely not growth, unless, of course, that's credit directed towards productive investments, which is not what the Fed is doing. Green energy technologies, by that I mean windmills and solar panels, not nuclear, which if you were serious, you would say, hey, this is the best way to reduce CO2, if that were your entire goal. These things aren't growth. They're the opposite of growth. They're less energy dense, less energy intense, and of course, they're unpredictable and uncontrollable. So a reptile has to depend on its environment for a good temperature to operate. It can only live in certain areas and only operate effectively on certain days and in certain seasons. To have an economy that's dependent on wind and solar would mean that we, like a reptile, would have to depend on good weather. This is evolutionarily a step backwards. We control our environment. We're warm-blooded. We should have energy sources that increase our independence from the environment, not our dependence on it. If climate change is a worry, why would you make the economy more and more dependent on what happens to be going on in the weather? We can't base industrial civilization on having nice weather. No way. Life moved from the seas to conquer land, to enrich the land. We human beings enrich the planet with our presence. We are good. Human beings are the best thing that ever happened on this planet. Look, your charming pets are not going to develop a rocket to bring life to other stars or re-engineer this one so it doesn't die after some billions of years. We might do that. We can do that. We embody the anti-entropic development of the universe in a personal form. Our minds have a miraculous power. It's a miracle, really, that we can develop thoughts that then have a physical power over the universe and let us change our relationship to our physical surroundings. And I see that coherence between a coherence between that ability of our minds and the understanding that we are made in God's image, in the image of the creative force of the universe as a whole. Don't let the powers that were destroy that beautiful potential. That's it for today, and we'll be back with Harley next week. So long.